Good morning, everyone. When we practice the Dharma, we seek to bring about a radical transformation in our entire being, from that of an ordinary person with a mind filled with greed, hatred, and confusion, to an omniscient being who has boundless love and compassion for all sentient beings and is able to lead them to a state of everlasting peace and happiness. Now, needless to say, this is going to take some time, and it's pretty complex. But I think if you're sitting here today, you might have guessed that there's a way to bring about this transformation in a shorter amount of time. And that's by moving to a place where all of the conditions are there to prevent the arising of afflictions and to support the cultivation of good qualities and positive states of mind. And that is exactly what a monastery is designed to do. So one thing that everybody learns after moving to the Abbey is that going from the regular householder's life to a monastic life requires an entire process of resocialization, where almost every aspect of your being is called into question. And in addition to learning all the different prayers and meditations and chants and practices that most Buddhists practice, I've spent a lot of my time and energy since coming to the Abbey at uncovering these identities that I hold and trying to deconstruct them. And I was just saying that this is often a very painful and confusing process, and it really helps to have the support of a community and wise mentors and guides here to support that process. So Buddhism teaches that every phenomenon lacks an independent, separate, unique self, and that all phenomena instead exist dependent on causes and conditions, on their parts, and on a mind that conceives and labels them. So this also applies to the self, or the person that we call the I. And the first step in the traditional meditation on emptiness is to identify the object of negation, which is the inherently existent I. But before we even get to this level of analysis, it's helpful to look at all the conventional identities that we carry around with us, sometimes completely unaware. So now I'd like to show you some images that shaped who I thought I was while growing up, or more precisely, who I thought I should be. And I'm sure many of these images will be familiar to you as well if you've grown up in the United States or other developed countries, westernized countries. Okay, so this first image represents what I concluded that a woman should look like, at least according to those in the fashion industry. So women are supposed to be blonde, white, thin, large-breasted, and actually I've never been any of these. So I grew up with a lot of anger towards myself for not having the right body shape, weight, or size. And I basically took on the identity of not beautiful. And I'm still working to dismantle this poor quality view of myself that has really interfered with my ability to have confidence and energy to do good things for the world and for myself. And one way that I've been able to loosen some of this unhealthy way of thinking is by doing meditation on the body. And this is common to all Buddhist practitioners. So this meditation is designed to reduce attachment and identification with the body, and we do this by breaking the body down into its parts. And then we can easily see that there's no I to be found anywhere within those parts or even within the collection. And then we can also see how it's really ridiculous to define our self-worth and the value of our life based on our hair color or hair texture. This is what the advertising industry has taught us to do. So ordaining also really helps this process of shedding these superficial identities based on appearances and physical characteristics. Because the first thing that we do after we ordain is to shave our head, we throw out our makeup and our perfume, and we put on baggy unstylish clothing that looks like everybody else's around us. And it's virtually impossible to define yourself as a sexual object anymore. And I didn't want to leave out the men in the room. So here's the image of, what the ideal man looks like. So another identity that I've had to work at letting go of is of the smart and successful career woman. So this woman is constantly advancing herself in her social circles, always trying to acquire new credentials and new accomplishments. And she's always searching for that better, higher paying job with a bigger, more impressive title. And that was actually one of the pieces of advice I received at the Career Center where I used to work, is that you should always be looking for your next job, even the day you're hired at your new job. And this person is ambitious, competitive, and really believes in the myth of individual accomplishment. And here's the male version of that to its fullest extent. So thankfully at the Abbey, this attitude of ambitious greed and self-centeredness is completely at odds with everything that we're trying to do. And I'm thankful because that attitude caused me a lot of suffering throughout my life. And here in a community, we're all trying to work together cooperatively, and we're trying to consider the needs of everybody else when we make our decisions, and to make sure that everybody has a fair contribution, a fair share to contribute. And no one's trying to advance themselves at the expense of anyone else, and we're not all fighting to get the biggest piece of the pie, and instead we're trying to live harmoniously with each other. So then there's the identity of a good family member, whether it be daughter or sister or mother or niece or aunt, etc. And they are accommodating, nurturing, they put their needs last. And also for men, this could be some kind of breadwinner role or a provider role. And here at the Abbey, we don't work for money. We don't work as caregivers or homemakers full time. We also can't act as head of households and force our opinions and wishes on everybody else, even though we might want to. Then there's the good student role, the good friend role, the good girlfriend role, which I've spent a lot of time dismantling. And some of you might even have a good citizen identity, a good sports fan identity, or the best of all, a good religious practitioner role. So for each of these roles, we have standards regarding what the ideal is, and we're constantly measuring ourselves against this standard. And chances are good that we're falling short, because ideals are just that. They're something that are rarely seen in this world and very difficult to live up to. And I'm not saying that there's anything bad with these roles inherently. It's just that if we start to define ourselves solely in terms of these roles, we're going to miss out on the bigger picture and also overlook our potential. So as I've worked hard to dismantle these identities, coming to live as a monastic, I've also tried to avoid creating new roles and standards that I lock myself into and judge myself against. So I've found myself obsessing over whether my hair is too long, because the ideal hair is the shiny bald head. I've had to accept that my robes are not going to line up perfectly around my waist, no matter how many times I fiddle with them. And I've tried not to make the size of the holes in my socks a status symbol of how deep my renunciation is. But more importantly, I've worked on my attachment to praise from my teacher and my seniors, and also being very competitive with my peers. I've seen me wanting to build new identities as the nun who can do policy research, who is not afraid to bring in controversial opinions into discussions and play the devil's advocate, and also to always reference other Buddhist traditions and what they do. And I've also seen my mind want to label myself as a friend to only a certain group of people. And these are usually people who praise me and smile at me. And then I'm a stranger to people who don't provide me with enough praise or attention. And then I'm an enemy to people who who I find myself struggling to communicate with or to connect with. So alongside dismantling those old identities, I've really had to focus on building up new ones that are also based on these same afflicted ways of thinking. So does this mean that we can't have any identities at all? Well, that would be an extreme, so no, I don't think that's the solution. We need a stable, conventional sense of self to practice the Dharma, to relate to others, and to plan our lives in a meaningful way. Conventional and ultimate reality are not contradictory. And we need to take the conditioning process into our own hands so that we can develop our minds and bodies in a skillful way that is in accord with reality. So some new identities that I'm trying to take on that I think could be more helpful are someone who is learning to practice the Dharma, someone who is learning to live around a group of people who have completely different backgrounds and temperaments than I do. Someone who is learning how to genuinely care about the needs of others. And someone who's learning how to create peace in a chaotic world. And I'm also starting to see myself as part of an ever-changing community and one part of a larger whole of humanity and all sentient beings. I think the key here is that these identities are open-ended and allow space for growth and change. And so I'm hoping that the flexibility with these identities will prevent me from building up new unrealistic expectations that will prevent me actually from growing in ways that I couldn't have anticipated beforehand. So the monastic lifestyle is very unique, but anybody who goes through their life has to take on different roles and let go of different roles at some point, whether they like it or not. So I'm hoping that this sharing will help you to do so gracefully and with optimism and joy.